You won't believe what really went down between Shaunie O'Neal and Pastor Keion Henderson. At first, it looked like the perfect love story. They had the kind of relationship that people dreamed about: picturesque vacations, matching outfits, beautiful Instagram posts, and of course, that stunning wedding in 2022 that had everyone talking. People thought Shaunie had finally found the peace she deserved after her rocky relationship with Shaquille O'Neal. But behind those smiles and sweet captions, something else was happening, something much darker. The truth started to show in small ways. At first, it was just fewer pictures together. Fans noticed Shaunie wasn't posting as much about Keion. Then came the captions: less love, more scripture. It was subtle, but it was there. People started to whisper. Was something wrong? Had the fairy tale already started to fall apart? Shaunie kept quiet, as she always did. She had learned to stay strong, to handle her problems in private. But even silence has limits. What made this breakup different was the way it slowly unfolded, piece by piece. And the craziest part, nobody saw it coming, not even her closest followers. Behind closed doors, Shaunie had been feeling something she didn't expect: loneliness. Keion, who was once so present, so emotionally connected, had changed. He became distant. He was around, but not really there. Shaunie would try to talk, try to explain how she felt, but the response was always the same. He'd smile, nod, and say, "Let's pray about it." That sounds good, doesn't it? But prayer wasn't fixing the silence. It wasn't stopping the cold feeling in the room every time they were alone. It wasn't helping when she sat next to him at church, holding his hand while feeling completely invisible. Then came the turning point, the night Shaunie found the messages. She hadn't meant to snoop, but sometimes when your gut tells you something's off, you just know. The texts weren't filled with love or scandal, but they were deep. They were emotional. They were personal. They were sent to someone who wasn't her. That was when everything changed. This wasn't just about cheating. It was emotional betrayal. Keion had shared a part of his heart with another woman, and to Shaunie, that hurt even more than a physical affair. She didn't explode. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she sat with it, thinking, praying, crying quietly when no one was looking. For weeks, she wrestled with the truth. Could she forgive this? Could she go on pretending everything was okay? But every day, the pain grew heavier and the silence between them grew louder. What made this story so shocking was how long Shaunie stayed quiet. She didn't run to the blogs. She didn't post cryptic messages. She waited, thinking maybe things would change. Maybe Keion would realize what he was doing and come back to her emotionally. But he didn't. And the more she waited, the more she realized something heartbreaking. He had already left her emotionally long before the public ever knew. The days turned into weeks, and the distance between Shaunie and Keion only grew wider. They still went to events together, still smiled for the cameras, still played the part of a happy couple, but behind those forced smiles was a woman slowly breaking down. Shaunie had always been known as strong, collected, and full of grace. But even the strongest woman has a limit, especially when she feels emotionally abandoned in her own marriage. Keion, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. In public, he kept his charm. He preached powerful sermons that touched people's hearts. He gave advice about love, healing, and forgiveness. The irony was almost cruel. He was speaking about connection and commitment, while his own relationship was falling apart behind closed doors. And the more he spoke, the more Shaunie felt like she was living in a lie. The man that people admired wasn't the same man she came home to every night. He was a stranger now. Then something happened that pushed Shaunie closer to the edge. During one of Keion's out-of-town trips for a church event, she noticed a change in his behavior. He stopped calling to check in. He gave dry responses to her texts, and when he came back, it felt like he brought someone else's energy with him. His presence was cold. His attention was distant. He acted like nothing was wrong, but that made everything worse. That silence, it screamed at her louder than any argument could. Shaunie tried to bring it up. She sat him down and told him how lonely she felt, how empty the relationship had become. And do you know what he said? He told her she was overthinking, that the devil was trying to create confusion in her mind, that their marriage was fine and she just needed to pray more. That's when it hit her. He wasn't listening. He didn't see her pain. He was more in love with the idea of their marriage than the reality of what it had become. Behind the scenes, Shaunie began opening up to a few close friends, people she could trust, people who had seen the signs long before she was ready to admit them. They told her what she already knew but didn't want to believe. This marriage wasn't feeding her soul anymore. And it wasn't about one mistake or one fight. It was about feeling unseen, unheard, and unimportant for far too long. But here's where the twist gets deeper. Just when Shaunie thought things couldn't get worse, rumors started to surface. People began whispering about a woman who had been close to Keion. Too close. A woman from the church, someone who had been around for months. It wasn't confirmed, but the tension in Shaunie's heart exploded. Everything suddenly made sense. The messages, the emotional distance, the way he brushed her off. Even if there hadn't been a physical affair, the emotional connection between Keion and that woman was undeniable. Shaunie was devastated, but she didn't confront the woman. She didn't even confront Keion again. At that point, what was the use? The damage was done. Trust had been shattered, and love no longer felt safe. All she could do was protect what was left of her heart. She focused on her kids, her career, her peace. But deep down, she knew the marriage was on borrowed time. Something had shifted, and it wasn't coming back. Shaunie began living in silence, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that echoed louder with each passing day. She was still wearing the wedding ring, still showing up beside Keion in public, but her heart had already walked away. And no one knew. No one could see the silent storm that was tearing her apart from the inside. She smiled at red carpet events, posted curated pictures on Instagram, and shared words of inspiration. But every time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Keion, meanwhile, kept going as if everything was fine. He preached with fire, stood in front of crowds, gave interviews about faith, family, and commitment. But to Shaunie, his words felt empty. It was like he was performing a role, one he had mastered. He talked about building a kingdom with your partner, about the importance of honoring your wife, but when the cameras were off, his energy told a different story. He wasn't mean or cruel. He was just absent, emotionally unavailable. His love was no longer warm, no longer reaching her. Things got even more twisted when a conversation surfaced, a conversation that Keion had with someone close to him. In it, he spoke about how marriage was harder than he expected, how he felt Shaunie had become too independent, too focused on her own life. He hinted that he didn't feel needed. The words crushed Shaunie when they reached her. After everything she had sacrificed, all she had poured into the marriage, she was being painted as the problem. The woman who was too strong, the one who made him feel small. But here's the truth. Shaunie had never stopped trying. She just got tired of trying alone. In the background, their private life was unraveling, and it was getting harder to keep it hidden. Their close circle began noticing the tension. Friends started asking questions. Some tried to defend Keion, saying he was under pressure, that pastors carried heavy spiritual weight. But Shaunie had already made peace with what she saw. His emotional disconnect wasn't about pressure. It was a choice to stop showing up in the relationship. Then came a breaking point. It was a small moment, but it hit hard. At a family event, surrounded by people who loved them, Keion barely acknowledged her. He spent most of the time on his phone, barely engaged, his laughter saved for everyone but her. And when they got home, he simply went into the other room and closed the door. No conversation, no check-in, just silence. That night, Shaunie sat alone and cried, not because of that moment, but because she knew that it wasn't just about that night. It had been building for months. maybe longer. She had fought so hard to keep the marriage alive. She had prayed, compromised, adjusted, waited, but you can't fight for a marriage by yourself. And she finally realized she had already lost him. But here's where the story takes another sharp turn, because just when you think Shaunie was about to fall apart, something inside her lit up, a shift, a decision. She was tired of being quiet, tired of dimming herself, tired of pretending everything was fine. It wasn't, and she was done protecting an image that didn't match her reality. Shaunie woke up the next morning with swollen eyes but a clearer mind. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't confused. She knew what she had to do. She didn't rush into drama, didn't call him out publicly, didn't post a cryptic message online. She just started making quiet moves. She reached out to her team, adjusted her schedule, and began carving out space for herself. Space that wasn't about being a wife, a first lady, or someone else's shadow. Keion noticed the shift, but he didn't say much. Maybe he thought it was just a phase. Maybe he believed she would come back around like she always did. But this time was different. Shaunie wasn't angry. She was calm. And that calm scared him more than any argument ever could. She started spending more time with her children, diving back into her own businesses, and surrounding herself with friends who actually saw her pain. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel the grief of the marriage, but she didn't let it define her. Her strength was quiet, but it was powerful. She didn't need to expose Keion or defend herself to the world. The truth was already living in her peace. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, but no one saw coming. In a quiet interview promoting her new book, Shaunie confirmed what people had started to suspect. She was no longer with Keion. The marriage had ended, and it ended not with cheating, not with scandal, but with absence, with neglect, with emotional silence that spoke louder than words ever could. The internet exploded. Some were shocked. Others said they saw it coming. Fans started pulling up old videos, interviews, even wedding clips, trying to read between the lines, searching for signs that were missed. People had questions. Why didn't it work? What went wrong? But Shaunie didn't owe anyone the details. She had already lived the truth, and now she was just trying to heal from it. What made the story even more heartbreaking was the fact that she had loved him deeply, truly. She had believed this marriage would be her fresh start, her second chance at happiness. But sometimes love isn't enough when the other person stops showing up. And that's what happened. Keion didn't betray her with someone else. He betrayed her with silence, with absence, with the slow fading of presence that left her feeling alone, even when he was sitting right next to her. But Shaunie didn't let the heartbreak define her next chapter. She used it. She turned the pain into power. Her book became a bestseller, her brand grew stronger, and women everywhere started reaching out, sharing their own stories of silent heartbreak, of feeling unseen in their own marriages. Shaunie had become more than just a public figure. She had become a voice. A reminder that it's okay to walk away from what's hurting you, even if the world doesn't understand. And as for Keion, he kept preaching. He kept his smile. He didn't say much about the divorce. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't know what to say. But the silence that ended the marriage followed him, and not everyone was convinced by his sermons anymore. The charm, the charisma, the polished words, they started to feel different now, because once people knew the truth, the quiet truth, they started to listen differently. Shaunie, meanwhile, had finally found peace. Not because everything worked out the way she wanted, but because she had the courage to stop waiting for someone to love her right and started loving herself instead.